त्वमेव माता च पिता त्वमेव त्वमेव बन्धुश्च सखा त्वमेव त्वमेव विद्या द्रविणं त्वमेव त्वमेव सर्वं मम देवदेव। ॐ पार्थाय प्रतिबोधितां भगवतां नारायणेन स्वयं व्यासेन ग्रथितां पुराणमुनिना मध्ये महाभारतम् अद्वैतामृतवर्षिणीं भगवतीम् अष्टादशाध्यायिनीम् मत्वामनुसन्दधामि भगवद्गीते भवद्वेषिणीम्। नमोऽस्तु ते व्यासविशालबुद्धे पुल्लारविन्दायतपत्रनेत्र येन त्वया भारततैलपूर्णः प्रज्वालितो ज्ञानमयप्रदीपः प्रपन्नपारिजाताय स्तोत्रवेत्रैकपाणये ज्ञानमुद्राय कृष्णाय गीतामृतदुहे नमः। सर्वोपनिषदो गावो दोग्धा गोपालनन्दनः पार्थो वत्स सुधीर्भोक्ता दुग्धं गीतामृतं महत् वसुदेवसुतं देवं कंसचाणूरमर्दनं देवकी परमानन्दं कृष्णं वन्दे जगद्गुरुम्। भीष्मद्रोणतटा जयद्रथजला गान्धारनीलोत्पला शल्यग्राहवती कृपेण कर्णेन वेलाकुला अश्वत्थामविकर्णघोरमकरा दुर्योधनावर्तिनी स्तोत्तीर्णा खलु पाण्डवै प्रणन्ति कैवर्तकः केशवः पाराशर्यवचः सरोजममलं गीतार्थगन्धोत्कटम् नानाख्यानकेसरं हरिकथा सम्बोधनाबोधितम् लोके सज्जन षट्पदैरहरः पेपीयमानं मुदा भूयात् भारतपङ्कजं कलिमलपर्ध्वंसिनः श्रेयसे मूकं करोति वाचालं पङ्गुं लङ्घयते गिरिं यत्कृपातरां वन्दे परमानन्दमाधवम्। यं ब्रह्मा वरुणेन्द्र रुद्रमरुतः स्तुन्वन्ति दिव्यैस्तवैः वेदैः साङ्गपदक्रमोपनिषदैर्गायन्ति यं सामगाः ध्यानावस्थिततद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यं योगिनो यस्यान्तं न विदुःसुराः सुरगणाः देवाय तस्मै नमः। शान्ताकारं भुजगशयनं पद्मनाभं सुरेशं विश्वाधारं गगनसदृशं मेघवर्णं शुभांगं लक्ष्मीकान्तं कमलनयनं योगिभिर्ध्यानगम्यं वन्दे विष्णुं भवभयहरं सर्वलोकैकनाथं सर्वलोकैकनाथं सर्वलोकैकनाथम्।
Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Hari Om. Thank you so much for the wonderful prayer, Sudhamshu. Namaskara, everyone. Welcome to today's lecture, Ashtanga Yoga in the Bhagavad Gita. Before jumping into Ashtanga Yoga, let's ask ourselves a few basic questions. What is yoga? Is twisting and turning our bodies into impossible postures yoga? Sadly, yoga has become synonymous with asanas or physical postures in the modern world. Krishna defines yoga as equanimity in Sankhya Yoga, 2nd chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Yogastaha kuru karmani sangam tyaktva dhananjaya siddhya siddhyo samo bhutva samatvam yoga uchyate. Second question, what is meditation or dhyana? Are dhyana and meditation different, or is dhyana part of yoga? If I sit with my eyes closed, am I in meditation, or have I just mastered sleeping in vertical postures? When we sign up for a yoga or a meditation class, first thing we do is we look for a nice looking, comfortable yoga mat, and we think we are prepared to dive in. We do not prepare our bodies and minds enough. 5 minutes into the sadhana, my back starts to hurt, my face starts to itch and my mind slips into wonderland. How do we prepare our bodies and minds for meditation? In 6th chapter, when Krishna introduces dhyana yoga to Arjuna, Arjuna says, Chanchalam himana Krishna pramati balavadridam tasyaham nigraham manye vayoriva sudushkaram. Arjuna, the greatest archer, warrior of his time, shares the difficulties of dealing with his unruly mind. Imagine our state when we sit for meditation. Third and final question, who is a yogi? Krishna, towards the end of dhyana yoga, says, Tapasvibhyodhiko yogi jnanibhyopi matodhikaha karmebhyschadhiko yogi tasmad yogi bhavarjuna. Krishna asks us to be that yogi who is above tapasvi, jnani, and karma yogi. Does being sthita prajna and gunatita make us the yogi Krishna is referring to here? Clearly, I don't have the answers. Coming to today's topic, Ashtanga Yoga. What are these 8 limbs of yoga Maharishi Patanjali classified into? To help us understand more on Ashtanga Yoga and how it is interleaved in Bhagavad Gita, we have with us today Dr. Shriram Sarvotham. Dr. Shriram began his yoga studies at the young age of 11. In 2019, Shriram and his wife Ekaterina co-founded Ekashri Schools of Yoga with a mission to share the joy of yoga with the world. Dr. Shriram is a recipient of various accolades. On behalf of everyone, I welcome Dr. Shriram to address and enlighten us.
Hari Om. Gurugalige Namaskara. Thank you so much, Nagabhushanaji, for the very beautiful foundation for today's talk on Ashtanga Yoga. So I would like to start with an inquiry on what is health. What do we think is exuberant expression of health? What we can do about it, and how the topic of Ashtanga Yoga, the practices in Ashtanga Yoga, helps with the exuberant health. The word for health, one of the words for health in Sanskritam is swastha. Swastha. So we can split the word swastha as swa, swasmin, that means in myself, stha, to stand or to abide by. So the literal meaning of the word swastha is to abide in oneself, to be with oneself. So how does being with oneself create health? How does it bring exuberant expression of health? So in order to see this, there is a very beautiful verse in the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, where Lord Krishna, he talks about the relationship between the self, the Purusha, and the mind-body complex. How the two are related. As we know, we are not the mind, we are not the body. The 2nd chapter in Sankhya Yoga, Krishna says that we keep acquiring new bodies, just like we discard old clothes. Vasamsi jirnani yatha vihaya, navani grinnati naroparani. So we acquire new clothes. Like that, we acquire a new body to continue our eternal experience and expression of life. So the relationship between the self and the mind-body complex is revealed with a very beautiful metaphor in the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. So allow me to chant that verse. Yatha prakashayat yekaha kritsnam lokamimam ravihi kshetram kshetri tatha kritsnam prakashayati bharata. So here Lord Krishna says, Yatha prakashayati ekaha, just like there is one sun which is illuminating the entire planet. There is one sun whose presence spurs all the activity in this planet. Like that, the presence of the self, Kshetri. Kshetri means the one who resides in this Kshetram, the body. The body is called Kshetram. Idam Shriram Kaunteya Kshetramiti Abhidiyate. Lord Krishna says Kshetram is the body, which includes not just the physical body, but the Sukshma Sharira as well, which is the mind. So that is why when we say Kshetra, it is the mind-body complex. So just like the presence of the sun spurs activity on this planet, the presence of the self, the Purusha, spurs activity in this mind-body complex. It is because of the presence of the self, all the physiological processes in the body take place. So the moment the self exits the body, in the moment of the physical death, then all the physiological processes come to a grinding halt. That's it. So it is because the body, the mind, has the presence of the self, that is when it is enlivened. That is when health expresses itself. So now let us go back to the definition of health, swastha. So when we are abiding in ourself, it is like we are basking in the presence of the energy that enlivens the whole body mind complex. Just like the flowers bloom, the birds sing, the entire planet awakes when the sun rises. Like that, when we are connected to the self, when the body and the mind are residing or abiding in ourself, we are healthy. So what a beautiful definition of health. So Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras, he expands on this word swastha. He says, Swarupe avasthanam. Swastha, he expands it as Swarupe avasthanam. Abiding in the self, Swarupa, avasthanam, residing there. When does that happen? When can we abide in ourself? Why is it that we get disconnected from the self in the first place? So when we are disconnected from the self, it is called aswastha, the condition where we are not benefiting from the presence of the self. That is when we feel uprooted. We don't feel the energy coming from the self, and that leads to illness and disease, etc. That is the model that yoga and Ayurveda present. So when we are connected with the self, we have the perfect foundation to create exuberant health. Now, how is that achieved? How can we abide in ourself? For that, Maharishi Patanjali says, Chitta vritti nirodha. In fact, he defines yoga this way. Yoga, chitta vritti nirodha. Tada drashtuhu swarupe avasthanam. When the mind is quiet, when the disturbances of the mind, they are silenced, then we abide in ourself. That is what Patanjali says. So let us revisit those two sutras. Yoga chitta vritti nirodha. Yada chitta vritti nirodha tada drashtuhu swarupe avasthanam. When the mind is tranquil, when it is free of disturbances, then we abide in ourself. It is like when the surface of the lake is turbulent, when it is agitated, then we cannot see the depth of the lake. It is invisible. Like that, when the mind is turbulent because of Rajoguna, when Rajoguna is raging in the mind, or when it is filled with Tamoguna, darkness in the mind, when the mind is cluttered, then we cannot see the depth. The depth of the lake can be seen only when there is clarity and when there is tranquility. Two conditions. There is no turbulence in the lake and the water is clear, crystal clear. So when our mind is crystal clear, free of turbulence, when all the vrittis are silenced, then we have access to who we are. We abide in ourself. So that is the secret of good health, namely chitta vritti nirodha. Now, the question becomes how to achieve that. As Nagabhushanaji enunciated from the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Chanchalam hi Mana Krishna, Arjuna says, my mind is so turbulent, like the wind, he says. Chanchalam hi Mana Krishna, Pramati Balavadridam, Tasyaham Nigraham Manye, Vayoriva Sudushkaram. Just like Vayu, like a hurricane. The mind is so turbulent. How do you expect me, O Krishna, to silence this unruly mind? Is the question that he asks. And Krishna says, Asamshayam Mahabaho, no doubt, O Arjuna, mind is unruly. Asamshayam Mahabaho, Manodur Nigraham Chalam, Abhyasena tu Kaunteya, Vairagyena cha Grihyate. With the twofold practice of Abhyasa and Vairagya, silencing of the mind becomes easy. It can be achieved. No doubt the mind is unruly, but we have two keys to open the tranquility of the mind. The solution to quiet the mind is Abhyasa and Vairagya. Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras echoes the same teaching. He says in one of the sutras, Abhyasa Vairagyabhyam Tannirodha. Abhyasa Vairagyabhyam Tannirodha. So we quiet the mind in order to abide in the self, and then swastha happens. Now, what is the Abhyasa that we need to do, and what is Vairagya? So Abhyasa are practices. Tatra sthitau yatno bhyasaha is how Patanjali defines Abhyasa. The methods that we use, the devices that we use, the techniques that we employ in order to abide in the self, to bring the mind to tranquility. Whatever we do to create that experience is Abhyasa. And what is Vairagya? Vairagya is detachment. That means not hankering for quick results, being patient with our practice. The Abhyasa we do just like we nurture a plant. We sow the seeds and wait for some time before the seed sprouts. So that is Vairagya, detachment. So let us look into Abhyasa. What are the practices we need to do in order to silence the mind and to allow the experience of exuberant health? So one of the systems of practice that Patanjali describes in the Yoga Sutras is Ashtanga Yoga. He describes actually 3 systems of practice. One of them is Ashtanga Yoga. What is Ashtanga Yoga? As the name suggests, it is a beautiful blend of 8 components. Ashtanga, 8 limbs of yoga, Ashtanga Yoga. So the practice, Abhyasa, consists of 8 parts or 8 components. So that is the remedy, Upaya, that Patanjali gives for the turbulence in the mind and for the confusion in the mind. How to remedy that Upaya is Ashtanga Yoga. So let us quickly see what are the 8 limbs that Patanjali prescribes in Ashtanga Yoga, and then we will delve deeper and we will use the teachings from Bhagavad Gita in order to understand more and hopefully to inspire all of us into the practice of Ashtanga Yoga. The word Ashtanga you don't find in the Bhagavad Gita, but all the practices, all the angas of the Ashtanga Yoga are described in the Bhagavad Gita. So let us see what are the 8 limbs, the Ashtanga Yoga. I'll chant the sutra Patanjali and then we will translate the meaning of each of the 8 angas. Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, Samadayo, Ashtavangani is the sutra. So what are the 8 limbs? The first limb of Ashtanga Yoga is Yama. Yama means control. The literal meaning of the word Yama is to control. And it talks about how we control our interactions with the outside world. And we will delve a little more into it when we first complete our overview of the 8 limbs. So first is Yama, controlling how we interact with the outer world. Niyama literally means regulation or discipline. How we create good habits, good personal habits that will help us in the path of yoga. How we regulate ourselves. how we live our life in a disciplined way. That is niyama. The third anga is asana. Asana literally means seat. And nowadays, when we hear the word asana, we think of yoga postures. So these are practices for the body. And what are asanas? Why should we do the asanas? We will also look into this practice. The fourth limb is pranayama. Pranayama means controlling the flow of prana. We will examine what is prana and how the process of breath work, the practices involving breath work, will help in channelizing or to bring even flow of prana in the system. How to regulate the flow of prana using our breath. That is the practice of pranayama. The fifth limb of Ashtanga Yoga is Pratyahara. Pratyahara deals with the control of our senses. The word ahara means food. So in the context of yoga, ahara means not only the food that we consume that brings nutrition for the body, but it also refers to whatever we consume through our five senses. So pratyahara means roll back our ahara. And what does it mean? We will explore that. Controlling our senses, that is pratyahara. So those are the first five of the 8 Ashtanga Yogas, 8 limbs of Ashtanga Yoga. The last 3 limbs are inner practices. They are called Antaranga Sadhana. Antaranga Sadhana. What are they? The 6th limb of Ashtanga Yoga is Dharana. Dharana means to hold the mind in one place. We can think of it as focus, developing the power of concentration or the willpower, the power of determination. That is Dharana. 7th limb of Ashtanga Yoga is Dhyanam. Dhyana is usually translated as meditation. And what is it? We will see the definition of meditation as given in the Yoga Sutras as well as in the Bhagavad Gita. And then the last limb, 8th limb of yoga, Ashtanga Yoga, is Samadhi. Samadhi literally means evenness of the intellect. Samam, equilibrium. Dhi, which is the intellect. So when there is an experience of equilibrium, this is Samadhi, the perfect equilibrium. Samatvam yoga uchyate. In fact, this is yoga. In the Bhagavad Gita, we see Samatvam. The state of equilibrium is yoga. So these are the 8 limbs of Ashtanga Yoga. Now you will see these 8 limbs deal with our existence as a whole. It is a holistic practice. The objective is to quiet the mind. But there are practices for the body, there are practices for the breath, there are practices how we engage with the world. So if somebody says, okay, our objective here is chitta vritti nirodha, to quiet the mind. So why should I do practice for the body? Why should I engage my breath? Why should I regulate how I deal with others in the world? What is the purpose of all this? And we find the answer in the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And Nagabhushanaji already alluded to it. In order to quiet the mind, it is not just the duration of say 20 minutes that we sit in a yoga mat and we request our mind to be quiet because it doesn't listen to us. Even for Arjuna, so he is expressing that his mind is like a hurricane. So the mind doesn't listen to us. It requires preparation. In order to silence the mind to a place of tranquility, it requires preparation. For example, if we sit down expecting a deep experience of meditation without preparing the body, you know what happens? After 2 minutes, the discomforts of the body become very keenly felt. We are trapped in the concerns of the body, the discomforts of the body. Oh, my lower back hurts, my knee hurts, there is itching sensation on my face. So the whole body demands our attention. It doesn't allow the mind to settle down. So that is why we have practices for the body. Now, why do we have practices of how to live our life, how to engage with the world outside? Because when, for example, we are not kind to people, say we have uttered some hurtful words, say we hurt others, then it creates a feeling of guilt and regret. You see, there is a feeling of guilt and regret. And when we sit down for meditation, when we want to be with ourselves, the guilt and the regret start becoming very bothersome. We are not comfortable being with ourselves because we are not happy with who we are. That feeling of guilt and regret become very sore. So in order for us to be happy with who we are, see, the yogis are so sensitive. They understood that even what we deal with the outside world can create the experience when we sit for meditation. So much sensitivity is there. If I hurt another person, then it is not just they who are hurt, it is hurting me as well. So when I sit for meditation, it is going to hurt me as well. Swastha will not be created. We cannot abide in ourselves because there is feeling of guilt and regret there. So that is why we need to attend to our system as a whole to create the experience of tranquil mind. For Chitta Vritti Nirodha, that's why we need practices for all aspects of our existence. And that is why Patanjali has given 8 limbs of yoga. And we find these teachings in the Bhagavad Gita as well. So let us examine each of these 8 limbs in a little more depth. So the first limb of Ashtanga Yoga is Yama. Yama means control. It talks about how we engage with the outer world. How do we engage with the outer world? And Patanjali enumerates 5 Mahavratas. He calls them Sarvabhauma Mahavratam. That means they are Mahavratas, great vows, V-O-W, vow, great vows, great resolves that we take. And one of them is Ahimsa. There are 5 he enumerates: Ahimsa, Satya, Steya, Brahmacharya, Aparigraha, Yamaha. That is the sutra. But for the sake of time, we will examine one of these yamas. The first one is Ahimsa. Ahimsa means non-violence. Non-violence. When we engage with the outer worlds, to all beings, offer non-violence. Do not hurt other beings. So this is a principle of Yama, how we engage with the outside world. Patanjali says, when we are established in Ahimsa, then the beings, anybody who comes in our presence, any violent thoughts in their mind will simply disappear. Just like how darkness cannot abide in the presence of light. He says, Ahimsa pratisthayam tatsannidau vairatyagaha. Vairatyagaha. Their violent thoughts will simply disappear when they come to the presence of a yogi who is established in Ahimsa. The second Anga of Yoga Sutras is Niyama. Niyama means self-regulation. Disciplines that we create in our daily experience that helps us on the path of yoga. And here also he enumerates 5 of them. Shaucha, Santosha, Tapas, Swadhyaya, Ishvara Pranidhanani, Niyamaha. That is the sutra. So again, let us look at one of them. Shaucha or Shuchi means purity or cleanliness. Keeping the physical environment clean, keeping the body clean, keeping the thoughts pure, not deceiving anybody. So living a life of integrity. So all this is purity. Now, when we read the Bhagavad Gita, all these 5 yamas, 5 niyamas and more are given. In various chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, what are the virtues that we need to inculcate, imbibe in our life that helps us create swastha, that helps us create an experience of bliss. So these ethical principles we imbibe in our life, not for the sake of others. When we are non-violent, it's not just we are helping the others, we are helping ourselves. So let me quote one verse, one shloka from the 13th chapter that talks about a list of virtues that need to be cultivated. So these, in fact, there are 20 virtues that are described in the verses 7 to 11 of the 13th chapter. I'll quote the first in that set. Amanitvam adambhitvam ahimsa kshantirarjavam acharyopasanam shaucham sthairyamaatma vinigraha. Amanitvam, humility. Adambhitvam, freedom from hypocrisy. Ahimsa, we saw ahimsa as one of the yamas. Ahimsa, non-violence. Kshanti means forbearance or patience. Kshanti. Arjavam, living a life of uprightness or sincerity. Acharyopasanam, Acharya Upasanam, to sit in the presence of the teacher, serve the teacher and learn from them. Acharya Upasanam. Shaucham, we saw this is the first niyama described in the Yoga Sutras. Shaucham, purity or cleanliness. Acharyopasanam, Shaucham, Sthiryam, stability in the mind. Atma vinigraha, that means controlling the mind so that it resides close to the self. It is not jumping around elsewhere. So these values are described. So there are 9 in this shloka, and then he continues in the next 4 verses. We'll see many more values that are described. Like that, we see many chapters in the Bhagavad Gita, values are described. For example, the 12th chapter, Adveshta Sarvabhutana Maitra Karuna Evacha. Adveshta, lack of hatred to all beings. Sarvabhutana. Like that, these values are given in so many places in the Bhagavad Gita. Now, how do we come up with this list of values? How does someone say, okay, I want to live this value? How do we come up with this list? And the secret is Siddhasya Lakshanani Sadhakasya Sadhanani. Siddhasya Lakshanani. The qualities of a Siddha, one who is an adept yogi, who's already controlled their mind, they're abiding in their self. The qualities that come naturally for them becomes the sadhana of the sadhaka. It becomes the practices for the student, for the sadhaka. So when we observe how a Sthita Prajna lives, in the 2nd chapter, it talks about, towards the end, Sthita Prajna Lakshanani, the qualities of a sage of stable mind. How do they walk? How do they talk? How do they sit? So when we examine how they walk, talk, etc., then we want to model our own behavior. We observe them, they're always kind. Their mind never gets perturbed. So let me practice that. It doesn't come naturally to me right now, but let me take it up as my sadhana. Siddhasya lakshanani, sadhakasya sadhanani. It becomes my sadhana. So like that, observing them, we follow the examples that they embody. The Bhagavad Gita, that's a very beautiful shloka in the 3rd chapter that says, Yad yad acharati sreshtaha tatta deve tarojanaha. Whatever example, sreshtaha, a person who exalted person who lives these values, the personal example that they set, it is emulated, it is practiced by others. And even in the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, Patanjali says, Vitaraga Vishayam Va Chittam. Keep thinking about people who are Vitaraga, for transcended the small-mindedness of craving and aversion and so forth. Their mind is stable. Keep thinking about them, because when we think about them, just like when we pour water in a container, the water takes the shape of the container. Like that, when we pour our awareness on a Sthita Prajna, our mind becomes like them. The more we think about them, we start imbibing the same qualities that are listed in Yamas and Niyamas. So Yama and Niyamas are the perfect foundation in Ashtanga Yoga. Without these ethical principles, all the benefits of yoga can be misused. For example, Ravana was supposed to be a great yogi, but unfortunately, he fell from grace because the Yamas and Niyamas were not established. What is the use of having so much power through yoga when there is no foundation of Yama and Niyama? Because these powers can be misused. So that is why Patanjali suggests Yama and Niyama as the foundation of Ashtanga Yoga. Now, the third Anga of Ashtanga Yoga is asana. Asana literally means seat. So when we want to sit for meditation, we want to transcend the body. We don't want to be trapped by the concerns and the discomforts of the body. In the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna mentions the practice of asanas. He says, Shuchau deshe pratisthapya sthiram asanam atmanaha. Shuchau deshe, in a clean place, pratisthapya. Let us situate ourselves there in sthiram asanam, in a posture that is steady. In a posture that is steady. Sthiram asanam atmanaha. It is like parking the car and then going out and enjoying the scenery. So if you think of the body as a vehicle, we want to park the vehicle so that we can enjoy the inner scenery. Otherwise, the car will start tormenting with all its issues and concerns and so forth. We don't want that to happen. We want to transcend the body. So how should the asana be practiced? Bhagavad Gita says, what is the posture that is conducive for meditation to happen? What is the posture that will allow the mind to be in peace, to be in a state of tranquility? He says, Samam kaya shirogrivam dharayan achalam sthiraha sampreksha nasikagram swam dishascha anavalokayan. So samam kaya shirogrivam. Kaya means the trunk of the body, shiras, the head, griva, the neck. So when we keep the trunk of the body, the neck and the head in samam, in the equilibrium position, that is conducive for meditation. All the asanas we do, as Nagabhushanaji said, asanas is more than just twisting and turning the body in weird ways and break our bones. That is not the objective of asanas. The practice of asanas, all postures that we do in a yoga mat, is to be able to sit with the spine in this position, the trunk, the neck and the head to be aligned in the equilibrium position. Whatever practices we do, Surya Namaskaras, many asanas we could do, ultimately they should serve this one objective, namely ability to sit in this position with the spine in the equilibrium position and transcend the body. So what are the benefits of sitting in this asana? What does it achieve? Patanjali gives the benefits of asana in one sutra. Of course, there are numerous benefits for the physical body. Every system of function, digestive function, musculoskeletal system is benefited. The nervous system is benefited. Endocrine system is benefited. A lot of research has been done, especially in the last couple of decades, that have examined the benefits of asanas. But how does asana benefit in quieting the mind? For that, Patanjali gives one sutra. He says, Tato dvandva anabhigataha. Tato dvandvaha anabhigataha. That means the practice of asanas relieves us from dvandvas. Dvandvas means conflicts. Whenever there is a division between two systems in the body, whenever there is conflict in the system, then it is like a tug of war that is happening in the body and mind. And when we want to resolve this conflict, asana helps. When we examine the body, it is like a Kurukshetra. There is a war happening. Let me give an example of a war between the tongue and the body's intelligence. Right? The cells of the body, the cellular community of the body, it requests nutrition, nutritious food. But the tongue says, no, I don't want nutritious food. I want delicious food, tasty food, junk food perhaps. You see, there is a huge war, Kurukshetra war, that is happening between the tongue and the body's intelligence. Like that, you can find numerous examples. Paramahamsa Yogananda, in his commentary of the Bhagavad Gita, he says all the warriors of the Kurukshetra war are simply metaphors of a war that is happening in our own body and mind. So when you view it that way, these dvandvas, these conflicts are happening all the time in our body and mind. Now, what is the solution for that? How do we transcend this? Sometimes we ignore the tongue and listen only to the body. but then it requires a lot of willpower. And when we slip, we might go on an eating binge. Okay, today I'm going to binge eating on junk food, and we are back to square one. We take one step forwards and 10 steps back. You see, it seems to be a losing battle. But Patanjali says there's a secret. There is a win-win solution that is possible. The body can win, the tongue can also win. What is the solution? Align the two together, resolve the conflict. When you practice asanas, what happens is, in due course of time, what the body wants and what the tongue finds as tasty, they become one and the same. You see, anything that benefits the body, it is enjoyed by the tongue as well. All the conflicts get resolved. Dvandvas also refer to the dualities such as Shita Ushna, the heat and cold, and then Mana Apamana, that means respect and insult, and so forth. In the Bhagavad Gita, we see many examples of these dvandvas. So the practice of asanas allows us to transcend, to come out of these dvandvas, so that they don't bother us when we go deeper in meditation practices. So these are dvandvas, and dvandvas are created because of rajoguna. When there is too much rajas in the system, these conflicts get more severe, more strong. And we can say that the practice of asanas pacifies the rajoguna. In the Yoga Chudamani Upanishad, there is a statement that says, asanena rajohanti. Asanena rajohanti. The practice of asanas reduces the turbulence in the body-mind complex. It reduces the conflicts. So that is asanas. Okay, now the body is comfortable. Body also feels very light. When the dvandvas are released, the body feels so light. When we read the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, it talks about 3 benefits for asanas. Arogyam, which is freedom from disease. Sthiryam, stability in the body. And Angalaghavam. Angalaghavam means lightness of the body. The body feels so light that we forget the body. You know, one of the definitions of good health in Ayurveda is, if you forget your body, you're healthy. Because we keenly feel the body only when something goes wrong, right? We become aware of our head only when we have a headache. When everything is okay, when we are enjoying good health, we don't constantly remind ourselves, I have a head, I have a left big toe. We don't constantly remember that. We forget the body. Patanjali uses the word videha, bhava pratyayo videha prakriti layanam. In the sutra, he says, one of the experiences of samadhi is videha, as if you have transcended the body, bodiless. You forget the body. It recedes into the background. So that is the third limb of Ashtanga Yoga. The fourth limb is Pranayama. Prana Ayama. Ayama means to lengthen. Prana Ayama. So what is Pranayama? Bhagavad Gita in the 4th chapter defines Pranayama. Lord Krishna says, Apane juhvati pranam, prane panam tatha pare, prana panagati rudhva, pranayama parayanaha. Apane juhvati pranam. When you offer apana we can think of as the out breath. When you offer the out breath to the prana, to the in breath, and then offer the in breath to the out breath. This way of regulating the breathing is called pranayama. That is the definition that is given. Now, what does it mean? Offer the out breath to the in breath, offer the in breath to the out breath. There are many interpretations that are possible. Different scholars have given different facets of how to reveal the meaning, the hidden meaning in this verse. And my teacher, Yogacharya Subramanian sir, with whom I studied for 14 years, so he used to say, there is a very simple explanation for this. When the apana equals prana, that means the expenditure of prana equals the inflow of prana. When we regulate what we consume through the prana, is the same as the input of the prana. When both are balanced, when there is a balance between prana and apana, any practice that you do to achieve that is called pranayama. Now, why should this balance be achieved? Because when apana is too much, apana means the prana is exiting the system. it is cleansing the system. Apana is needed for good health because it is what allows the impurities to be get rid of the system, to be flushed out of the system. So when apana is more than the prana that we consume, sooner or later we feel depleted, because it is like somebody spending more than what they earn. So sooner or later we feel lack of energy. Energy has been depleted. On the other hand, when there is too much prana, when the prana exceeds apana, then there is so much energy. They can get quickly agitated. Even a slight provocation can create a big rage in them. You see? So there is much more energy than what this vessel is capable of holding. So in order to understand this, let us see what is prana. What is prana? The definition of prana that is given is prakarshena anati gacchati tasmatu pranaha. Prakarshena anati gacchati tasmatu pranaha. That means prana is that entity that is responsible for anati. Anati means that which creates warmth, that which creates heat in the system, that causes the metabolic activities in the body. And gacchati means movement. It is responsible for movement, such as circulation of blood, etc. And also movement along all the nadis, even along the nerves. So anything that moves in the body is because of prana. All the metabolic processes is because of prana. Prakarshena anati gacchati tasmatu pranaha. When we go back to the analogy that we began with, yatha prakashayati ekaha kritsnam lokam imam ravihi. Just like the presence of the sun illuminates the whole planet. So in this analogy, sun is the Purusha, the earth is the body-mind complex, and prana is nothing but the rays of the sun. The rays of the sun is the prana. This is how the great legendary yogi Sri Krishnamacharya used to describe prana. Sri Krishnamacharya used to say that prana is nothing but sunlight. And how does the sunlight come? It comes from the Purusha. It comes from the sun. Because of that, that is why the word prana is sometimes synonymously used as life itself. Prana and life are synonymous. Prana and breath are also synonymous. So, in order to regulate this breath, in order to equalize prana and apana, what is the benefit of doing that? Patanjali gives the benefit of pranayama as tataha kshiyate prakasha avaranam. Tataha kshiyate prakasha avaranam. That means the practice of pranayama removes all the covering, all the smoke that surrounds the inner light, and it blocks the inner light. So when you clear that smoke, when you clear the tamas means darkness, right? When you clear the tamas and reveal the inner light, that is what pranayama does. Tataha kshiyate prakasha avaranam. Prakasha is the inner light, and avarana is the dark surroundings, the dark covering that prevents the inner light from exuberantly expressing itself. So pranayama reduces tamoguna. We chant in the Shanti mantra, tamasoma jyotirgamaya, right? Lead me from darkness to light. How can we achieve that in practice? Patanjali and Sri Krishna, they give us the way through pranayama. Pranayama removes tamas and reveals the inner light. It takes us from tamas to jyotirgamaya. Tamas to jyoti. Jyotishmati, Patanjali says, the light of the mind. So notice how the benefit of pranayama is very different from the benefit of asanas, and they complement each other so beautifully. You see, asanas reduce rajas. That's what we saw. The dvandvas are reduced. Pranayama reduces tamas. And they work so beautifully, they complement each other. In the 14th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, there's a very beautiful verse that talks about the dynamics of the three gunas. Lord Krishna says, Rajas tamas chabhibhuya Sattvam bhavati bharata Rajas sattvam tamas chaiva Tamas sattvam rajas tatha. Rajas tamas chabhibhuya Sattvam bhavati bharata. When you pacify rajas and tamas, sattva automatically comes up. You see? So you practice asanas, rajas comes down. You practice pranayama, tamas comes down, and sattva, clarity of mind, automatically comes up in the system. What a beautiful way to integrate these practices together, right? Now, some people, perhaps they ignore some angas of the Ashtanga Yoga. They say perhaps, oh, asana is my most favorite part of the practice. Pranayama is boring. Why should I sit and just observe my breath for a long time? All the action is there in the asanas. That is a very dangerous thing to do, to remove the angas of Ashtanga Yoga, because what happens when we do asana alone is rajas is reduced, but when we don't reduce tamas also, on some days sattva will come up, but on some other days tamas might come up. You see, 50% chance either sattva or tamas will come up when we do only asanas. For some people, armchair yogis, asana is too much for them. I don't want to trouble my body, so let me sit and just do pranayama. Then yes, tamas comes down, but on some days they will feel rajasic, they can get easily provoked, and on some days they will feel sattva. So in order to guarantee sattva comes up, we need to do both asana and pranayama. So rajas comes down, tamas comes down, and then sattva comes up automatically. So that is the beauty of how they all integrate so nicely to create a blend of practices. So that is pranayama. Patanjali says one more benefit of pranayama. Dharana sucha yogyata manasaha. Pranayama prepares the mind for dharana. Dharana is focus. It is the sixth limb of Ashtanga Yoga. It prepares the mind for dharana. But before we get there, we have the fifth limb that we need to examine, which is pratyahara. Pratyahara, the inward movement of the ahara. Our senses are consuming food. There are so many things that bombards our senses. Especially in this day and age, there are so many gadgets and gizmos that are vying for our attention. My teacher used to call them WMDs, weapons of mass distractions. And there are so many distractions. It's like overeating. When too much sensory overload happens, it is like overeating. So the practice of pratyahara, Patanjali defines pratyahara as swa vishaya asamprayoge chittasya swarupanukara ivendriyanam pratyaharaha. That means swa vishaya asamprayoge. Each of the five senses, they detach from their respective sense objects. Swa vishaya asamprayoge, and then chittasya swarupanukara iva indriyanam. The senses, they fold back into the mind, into the chitta. So the senses are right now, they're grabbing objects all over the place outside. Detach the senses from those sense objects and bring it back to the mind. This practice is called pratyahara. And in the Bhagavad Gita, we see a very beautiful analogy given by Sri Krishna in the second chapter. Yada samharate chayam kurmonganiva sarvashah indriyani indriyarthebhyah tasya prajna pratisthita. Like a kurma, like a tortoise who withdraws its limbs into its shell, like that withdraw your senses from the sense objects to the self. Patanjali says to the mind, chittasya swarupanukaraiva. So to the mind. So from the sense object to the mind. This practice is called pratyahara. We are giving rest to our senses. Pratyahara. Now, Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras, he does not explicitly talk about the subject of ahara, food. But in the 17th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna gives the wisdom about food, sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic types of food. For example, sattvic food. What is sattvic food? Ayu sattva balarogya sukha priti vivardhanaha rasya snigdha sthira hridya ahara sattvika priyaha. The food that brings life in the system, more prana in the system, that brings up the positivities, that brings up the cheerful qualities within us, that promotes good health and harmony, is called sattvic food. That is the preferred food for a sattvic person, is what Lord Krishna says. Now, this teaching on ahara, sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic ahara, can equally be applied to the ahara that we consume through our senses. You see, whatever we see, hear, taste, smell, or touch, anything that we consume through our senses, is it uplifting me? The music that I'm hearing, is it uplifting me? The talk that I'm listening to, is it uplifting me? Is it sattvic? So the same teaching can be applied to the ahara through our senses as well. So in Pratyahara, we become keenly aware of what we enter through the system, what we allow through our system. So we don't mindlessly consume something just because it is there. Sometimes when we go to a buffet, just because it is there, we don't simply put it in our food. I don't like it, but I'm putting it in my plate because it is there. Nobody says that. We are very careful on what we put in our plate. Like that, being careful with how we deal with our senses. That practice is Pratyahara, Pratyahara. And then Patanjali says, Tataha Paramavashyate Indriyanam. With the practice of Pratyahara, we gain control over our senses. Paramavashyate Indriyanam. Our senses are controlled. So these first 5 angas are called Bahiranga Sadhana. Bahiranga means external practices. The last 3 limbs of Ashtanga Yoga are called Antaranga Sadhana. Antaranga Sadhana means inner practices, dealing directly with the mind. Now we have prepared the outer shell, the body, the breath, etc. Now it is time to deal directly with the mind. Now, Lord Krishna says in verse in the 2nd chapter, even if you starve the senses, when we are practicing Pratyahara, when we disengage from the sense objects and we fold the senses to the mind can still be hankering for those sense objects. You see, just because we have shut off the senses, it doesn't mean that the mind has now become quiet, because the mind can create inner scenery, right? So he says, Vishaya vinivartante niraharasya dehinaha. Nirahara, even if you cut off the ahara, then the mind can still be consuming the food by creating memories. You see, niraharasya dehina rasavarjam rasopyasya param drishtva nivartate. The only way to transcend that, to bring the mind to a place of quietude, is param drishtva, to give the mind the experience of the highest. Then its attachment to the sensory objects, to the outside world, will simply wither away. It is like in the presence of sunlight, you don't need a candle. You see, like that, the pleasure that we get from outside world cannot stand a candle to the joy, the bliss that is experienced when we are with ourselves. Swastha, that experience of abiding in ourselves, that even a glimpse of that experience will reveal to us that the joy that we get from outside world is ephemeral. It is not eternal. It is ephemeral. Okay, now let us look into the last 3 limbs of Ashtanga Yoga. Dharana is the 6th limb of Ashtanga Yoga. Patanjali defines Dharana as Deshabandhas Chittasya Dharana. When we allow the Chitta, the mind, to be in one place, so that it is not moving around from place to place, it is in one place, Desha, in a single Desha. Deshabandhas Chittasya Dharana. Lock the mind in one place. The word Dharana comes from the word Dhr. The root word dhatu is Dhr. Dhr means to hold. And there are many variations of the word Dhr, Dharayate or Dhriti. And in the Bhagavad Gita, we see in the 18th chapter, Lord Krishna talks about this. He says, Dhritya yaya dharayate manah pranendriya kriyaha yogena avyabhicharinya dhritissa partha satviki. So how should this dhriti be practiced? Dhriti, the resolve, should be such that we take a determination. I'm taking this resolve to control my prana indriya kriyaha, mana prana indriya kriyaha, to control the mind, to control the prana, and to control the indriyas, the senses. You see, so this resolve, I am going to discipline my mind, I am going to discipline my prana, I am going to discipline my senses. This dhriti is dharana. You see, this resolve that we take, the single pointed resolve that I am going to control the instruments of the body, mind, the prana, etc. This resolve is called dharana. Many times we take a resolve, especially on the New Year's Day. Ugadi is coming up, right? So when we, or January 1st, when we take a New Year's resolution, perhaps by March, we have forgotten many of our resolutions. But a true dharana is when the mind remains one-pointed. The mind resides there. It doesn't wander away from the resolve. It is there. Desha bandha. We lock the mind to our resolve. This practice is called dharana. And then the seventh limb of Ashtanga Yoga is dhyanam. What is dhyana? Patanjali defines dhyana as tatra pratyaya ekatanata dhyanam. Pratyaya means the scenery in the chitta, scenery in the mind. The sum total of all the chitta vrittis in this instant of time is called pratyaya. And dhyana is defined as when that scenery in the mind remains the same from one moment to the next. Ekatanata happens. One moment to the next, the mind is so tranquil, the mind is so silent that it is not changing. The scenery is not changing. This state of mind is called dhyanam. And in order to understand dhyana, Lord Krishna gives a very beautiful analogy in the 6th chapter. So he says, the mind of a yogi in meditation is like the flame of a candle in a windless place. Flame of a candle in a windless place. So the verse appears in the 6th chapter. I'm forgetting that verse right now. Yatha deepo nivatastaha. 19th verse. Yatha deepo nivatastaha nengate sopama smrita yogino yata chittasya yunjato yogamatmanaha. Yatha deepo nivatastaha. Like a deepa in a windless place. Nivatastaha. Like that, the mind of a yogi is not flickering. It is not moving. So the same scenery. When you see the flame in a windless place and see the same scenery after 5 seconds, they are identical. You see the same thing. It is not moving. So that is the state of the mind of meditation. And when the mind is in meditation, it is quiet. We are not depleting all the precious prana for unnecessary thoughts. Because when the mind is agitated, it consumes energy, it consumes prana. So in meditation, we conserve prana. We are not consuming prana, we are conserving prana. And where does the prana go? It uplifts the quality of our awareness. The mind becomes so energized that its latent powers become manifest. The powers of intuition, the powers of creativity, they all come up with the practice of meditation. The mind becomes deeply intuitive. Patanjali says in the Yoga Sutras, Shrutanumana pragyabhyam anya vishaya visheshar tattvad. That means the intuitive thoughts, when the mind has access to intuition, the revelations that come from intuition are of a far superior quality than what you can gain through logic and linear thinking. You see, Shruta Anumana Pragyab. Anumana means logical thinking, inferential thinking. So the intuitive wisdom is of a higher quality, far superior quality than the wisdom that we can guess or wisdom that we can get by logical thought or linear thinking. So that is the power of meditation, dhyanam. And in fact, Patanjali gives so many more benefits of dhyanam. Let me mention one more. He says, Tatra dhyanajam anashayam. Any thoughts or action that is inspired from a place of dhyanam is free of karma. It will not add to the baggage of karmashaya. It will not create future bondage. Any thought or action that is inspired from a place of dhyanam will always free you. It will never bind you. So that is one of the benefits that Patanjali gives for dhyanam. And then the final, the 8th anga of Ashtanga Yoga is Samadhi. Samadhi means equilibrium or equanimous state of the intellect. How does Patanjali defines Samadhi? Tadeva arthamatra nirbhasam swarupa shunyam iva samadhi. Tadeva arthamatra nirbhasam. That means the mind merges with that. Tat means that. Tattvamasi. When we say Tattvamasi, that art thou. That means the mind merges into something bigger and it loses its small identity. Swarupa Shunyam happens. Tadeva Arthamatra Nirbhasam Swarupa Shunyam Iva Samadhi. So we discard our limited identity and merge with the higher principle. We merge with the divine. So that is Samadhi. That is the experience of Samadhi. It is like salt dissolving in water. It loses its form. Or a river that is merging into an ocean. Its small identity is lost. And when it merges with the ocean, it gets the power, the majesty of the ocean. That is how Samadhi is defined in the Yoga Sutras. And in fact, in the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says, Samadhi is yoga. Samadha vachala buddhihi tada yogam avapsyasi. Lord Krishna says, Samadhi, the state of Samadhi is yoga. Now, how can this Samadhi be achieved? How can this experience be created? And there is a clue that Krishna gives, Lord Krishna gives in the towards the end of the 11th chapter. It is through bhakti. Bhaktya tu ananyaya shakya ahamevam vidorjuna jnatum drashtum cha tatvena praveshtum cha param tapa. Praveshtum means you enter the space of divinity. You merge into the divine. It can happen through bhakti. And the same teaching is echoed in the Yoga Sutras by Patanjali when he says, Samadhi Siddhir Ishvara Pranidhanat. Samadhi Siddhir Ishvara Pranidhanat. Ishvara Pranidhana, by the practice of devotion. Pranidhana means Bhakti Vishesha, special devotion. So, special devotion, highest devotion to Ishvara creates the experience of Samadhi. And in fact, Ishvara Pranidhana is one of the niyamas. It is the fifth niyama that is described in the Yoga Sutras. So, these are the 8 limbs of Ashtanga Yoga. And by the way, Ashtanga Yoga doesn't stop here. The culmination of Ashtanga Yoga is the experience called Samyama. Samyama. What is Samyama? Trayam ekatra samyamaha. Trayam ekatra. The last 3 limbs of Ashtanga Yoga, which is the Antaranga sadhana, Dharana, Dhyana and Samadhi. When these 3 experiences are happening concurrently in the same time, in the same instant of time, there is Dharana, there is Dhyana, and there is Samadhi. This powerful state is called Samyama. This is when the mind has access to its fullest potential. And when we read the 3rd chapter of the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, he says all the siddhis, all the extraordinary powers that the yogi gets, there is only one thing that is needed, only one key that unlocks all the extraordinary powers, all the siddhis, and that one key is Samyama. And Samyama, what does Samyama do? It awakens the mind to its fullest, and Jnana Deepa is awakened, it is kindled. Yoganga Anushtanat Ashuddhikshaye Jnana Deeptira Viveka Khyate. This is what Ashtanga Yoga gives. Yoganga Anushtanat Ashuddhikshaya, removing the impurities. Jnana Deepa, the light of knowledge comes, and Viveka Khyate. Viveka Khyati means discernment of the mind. Mind is able to see what is truth, what is untruth, what is Satya, Mithya, the division you can easily see. What is self, what is not self, it is able to see clearly. And so the experience of Samyama is the awakening. It is when the Jnana Deepa is awakened. And in the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says the same thing. For a Samyami, the mind is awakened to light. Ya Nisha Sarva Bhutanam Tasyam Jagarti Samyami. For a person in Samyama, a Samyami, whatever is dark to others, it is revealed as day to them, because they have the flashlight, they have the torchlight of the Jnana Deepa that illuminates what was not visible before. What we were ignorant to before, now it becomes visible to us. That is Samyama. So this is an overview of Ashtanga Yoga. So if I have to leave with the final summary, couple of points I will just make and then I will close. The power of Ashtanga Yoga comes from the combination of these practices. The combination of all these 8 angas are much more powerful than the mere sum of its parts. So there's a word for that. It's called synergy. Synergy means the combination is much more powerful than the sum of its parts. It's like buy two, get one free. You see? Just like we saw how when we combine asanas and the pranayama, rajas comes down, tamas comes down, and sattva guarantee comes up. So the combination creates a much higher experience than the mere sum of the benefits of individual parts. When we introduce this combination of practices in our life, it creates the foundation for exuberant health to happen and for the experience of enormous personal growth. That is what Ashtanga Yoga gives. And as we saw, the experience of samyama, the culmination of Ashtanga Yoga, our actions become more powerful because we have access to our full potential. And in fact, in the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says, Yogastha kuru karmani. Be established in yoga and then do your actions. Do not reverse the order. You see, be in yoga, yogastha, and then do your action. Yogastha is nothing but swastha. That is how we began this session, right? Swastha, abiding in ourselves. Yogastha, swastha. When we are established in ourselves, then not only do we experience exuberant health, but our actions become that much more powerful, that much more effective. So I thank you all for your very enthusiastic and very patient listening. Let me hand it over to Nagabhushana ji. And once again, thank you so much. And thank you again, Gurugalu. Namaste.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shriram ji, for your insights. Starting from definition of health to step-by-step explanation of Ashtanga Yoga. It was like standing on an escalator and just escalator thus goes from one level to other. It was really all the examples and day-to-day instances, they were really helpful. I think all of us are really, that was a great introduction on Ashtanga Yoga and all the practices that come under Ashtanga Yoga. Thank you so much. So we have some few questions. Would you like to take some questions now? Do we have time?
Sure, certainly.
So one of the question is, which of these 8 should we start with? Or should I start with all of them? How do we add one after the other? Because all of these 8 seems interdependent, like you mentioned in the end. So how do we begin if we want to start with Ashtanga Yoga? How do we begin with?
Yes, that's an excellent question. These are called 8 angas, limbs. They're not called 8 steps. Patanjali doesn't use the word sopana, like steps. He uses the word anga. Just like when we look at the limbs of the body, the arms and the legs. So when the physical body is growing from the infant to the adulthood, it is not that the right arm grows first and then the left arm grows next. It's not like one after another. They all simultaneously grow. So that is how we approach the Ashtanga Yoga as well. In other words, our daily practice of Ashtanga Yoga includes ingredients from all the 8 angas. And all of them benefit each other anyways. For example, we saw how asanas benefit dhyanam because we transcend the body, and the dhyana, the experience is more enhanced because we are not trapped by the body. And the reverse is also true. The more meditation we practice, the asana practice also becomes higher quality. I remember when I was studying with my teacher, somebody asked him, "Oh, I want to practice this advanced asana. How do I achieve that advanced asana?" And they were expecting our teacher to say, "Okay, do this asana, step by step, advance your way towards more and more complicated asanas." He didn't say that. He said, "Do dhyanam, do meditation. The body will relax, and with the relaxed body, with the lightness of the body, you can easily achieve your asana." You see how dhyanam also helps asana. Like that, each of the 8 angas are interdependent. They help each other. That is why they work in synergy. They complement each other. So they are not 8 steps. All of them have to be done in parallel.
Thank you. So one more question is, I am initiated to Kriya Yoga, and I keep doing practices for 6 months continuously, and then I take a small vacation, and my practices, I stop practicing every day. So how do I make it a point that I do it every day and I don't have this little a break in between?
Yes. So about Kriya Yoga, first of all, Patanjali in his Yoga Sutras, he does not give only Ashtanga Yoga as the system of Abhyasa. He gives actually 3 systems, and one of them is actually Kriya Yoga. Just like we have Ashtanga Yoga system, Kriya Yoga is also another system. And I practice Kriya Yoga as well. For example, Sudarshana Kriya is part of my daily sadhana. And so what are the ingredients for a high quality yoga practice? How should the Abhyasa be performed? So let me share what Patanjali says. How to strengthen our daily practice. He gives 4 ingredients for a high quality yoga practice. I'm sure you are eager to know what are these 4 ingredients, right, for the high quality yoga practice. He says, Satu Dirghakala Nairantarya Satkara Sevito Dridabhumihi. So the first ingredient is Dirghakala. Dirghakala means the practice should be done in a long term. It is not just like a weekend activity, you see. It is something that we engage in for the long term, many years, many decades of practice. So that is the first ingredient of a high quality yoga practice, Dirghakala. Second ingredient is Nairantarya. Nairantarya means without a break, without offering a holiday to our yoga practice, practicing it regularly. Set that rhythm for the practice, and we will see how to bring this rhythm. And then the third ingredient is Satkara. Satkara means doing the practice with honor, respect, and enthusiasm. There is a sacredness to this practice. It is a puja. What is puja? Purnat jayate iti puja. When the heart is full of devotion, bhakti, whatever we are inspired to express is called puja. Puja is not demanding, give me this, give me that. Puja means with an expression of fullness in the heart. The offering that we do is called puja. So with this sacredness, doing the practice of yoga, that is the third ingredient. Not doing the practice with a grumbling attitude. Oh, I promised myself that I will do yoga and then I have to drag my body in the yoga mat. It's not with that attitude we do. We do it with honor, respect, and enthusiasm, eager to do it. And then the fourth ingredient of a high quality yoga practice is asevitaha. Asevitaha means doing the practice as a way to serve the instruments of the body, mind, prana, etc. We are serving the body because the body has been serving us all this time. It's our vehicle. We take better, most people take better care of their car than their own body. You see, not realizing that this is the only vehicle that we carry throughout our life, the body and the mind. So this is my time to serve these instruments that have been helping me all this time. So not doing the practice with a sense of demand. I'm going to do this practice. In 6 months, you better lose 20 pounds. It's not with that attitude we practice yoga asanas. We do it with a way to serve the body and the mind. And then when these 4 ingredients are established, Dridabhumihi, the benefits of yoga become firmly grounded, is what Patanjali says. Now, how do we establish this rhythm, Nairantarya, without a break? How do we establish that? It happens with continued practice, creating a new samskara. Samskara means habit. Previously, this habit was not very strong. Some days we don't feel like doing practices, so we just laze out. Perhaps we don't do the practice. Now, Patanjali gives us a clue. He says, usually we deal with opposing samskaras, 2 samskaras on the opposite direction. And he gives some examples. For example, the 3rd chapter, he talks about Utthana samskara and Nirodha samskara. Utthana samskara means the tendency or the habit of the mind to always go outside. Nirodha samskara means the habit of the mind to repose in the self. So like that, the samskaras are always playing a tug of war. Now, we have created a samskara of not doing yoga practices say. And now we are trying to create an opposing samskara to have that habit be formed. Now, even a little bit of practice we do. In the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, it says, Swalpamapi asya dharmasya trayate mahato bhayat. Even a little bit of practice has enormous rewards. When you do the practice today, it strengthens the samskara of our daily abhyasa a little more. And then tomorrow's practice a little bit more. Suppose we forget the practice for one day. Don't worry. The next day, keep strengthening your samskaras of the daily practice. And with continued practice like this, there comes a time when the samskara for the strength of the samskara of daily practice exceeds the samskara to lays out, you see. And from that moment onwards, naturally, we step in the yoga mat and start doing our yoga practices. We don't have to fight with the body to request the body, please come to the yoga mat. The body will cooperate with you. The body will not resist you. The body will assist you in the progress in yoga.
Thank you so much, Sriramji. That was resonating. So there is one more question. Who can we call a yogi? So what does Ashtanga Yoga talks about that?
Yes, we see the definition of who is a yogi in the, as you mentioned, Nagabhushanaji earlier on, in the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And so in the Yoga Sutras, of course, Patanjali defines what is yoga. So we could say that a yogi is one who has that chitta vritti nirodha established. In other words, the vrittis, the agitations of the mind, when it is subdued, when it is silenced, then for such a person, then the chitta vritti nirodha happens. They are a yogi. Now, this word yoga itself is very interesting, right? Many scriptures give different definitions. When we look at the root word yoga, when we consult sage Panini in his Dhatu Pata, he actually gives 3 definitions for the root word yuj, from which yoga comes. And he gives 3 definitions. One definition is yujur yoge, to combine things in harmony, to bring things together. Uniting things in harmony is yoga. Second definition he gives is yuja samadhau. Yoga is samadhi. And the third definition he gives is yuja samyamane. Yoga is samyama. And we saw what is samyama today, where the mind is now has access to its full potential, full power by the concurrent experience of dharana, dhyana and samadhi. So he gives 3 of these definitions. So any person who has achieved one of these 3, either they're in samadhi or they're in full samyama, is a yogi, we could say that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sriramji. Thank you. I would like to invite our Guruji, Sri Swami KV, to address us. Guruvela, over to you.
Sir, you are not audible.
Guruvela ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ.
Can you rejoin, sir?
Can you listen now? Is it
Yes,
okay?
Guruvela. Yes.
Right. So, Dr. Sarvotham ji, you have given a good talk and you have confirmed Bhagavad Gita students that what they have been studying is what you have told. But historically, I think Bhagavad Gita came first. So the yoga that was there in Bhagavad Gita is systematized by Patanjali ji. So he showed the way. And while listening to you, I just thought you are just talking about ultimately Bhagavad Gita only. So here is a Mahabharata which you said. Mahabharata is not the story that was associated with Duryodhana Pandavas. It's going on in our mind every day. How should we overcome the battle that is going on inside us is the subject. Arjuna must be able to do the war, still be unperturbed. So that's the greatest training given by Krishna to Arjuna. Compared to Arjuna, we are all simple people. Our problems aren't that big as Arjuna's. And there are usually, I tell about the 7th chapter. It's called Jnana Yoga. That is, there are two things. One theory class and another one is the practical. So in the Jnana, we try to learn what is there in Bhagavad Gita. And in Vijnana, we try to put them into practice. In Jnana, we know how to swim, but in theory. In Vijnana, even if we drown in water, we can get up and swim. So yoga teaches us the way. And I usually tell people go here and think that they will get solution there, and they come back, that don't solve the problem. They go for a few days to another system to see that whether they can get peace of mind. No, it's not possible. So at least we must come to a conclusion. There is one thing that can solve all our problems. That happens to be Bhagavad Gita, that I have been telling to my, I don't want to say my students, those who are willing to Bhagavad Gita sitting in my class. And your talk is more enjoyed by my students, because every shloka you said, they have underlined it, and they have studied about it, and they have made a note about it, and that has been of a great help. And you have confirmed them also. Follow Bhagavad Gita. I generally tell them, read every day Bhagavad Gita once. It doesn't take much time after practice of 2 or 3 years. It only takes 45 to 50 minutes. Yad bhavam tad bhavati. If you go on reading with an understanding of the meaning, gradually the mind will learn what is there, and it will get imbibed. That is, it's something like a self-hypnotism. It will teach us to be good ones. So your work has been really good, sir. I must thank you for coming to our forum and talking so well to us. And also thank Nagabhushan Hegde for doing all the question and answer session and welcome and other things. And there are good friends of mine, Nagendra, Shilpa, Shivaranjini, Abhijit, not one or two. I think I have got more than 20 or 50 people who have been running this class and who have been organizing these meetings. I must thank all of them. So wish good luck to all of them. Thank you so much. Good luck to everyone.
Thank you. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Dhanyavadaha.
Thank you so much, Guruvada.
And I think Sudhi is going to end up with a shloka, dhyana shloka.
अथ गीता महात्म्यं गीता शास्त्रमिदं पुण्यं यः पठेत् प्रयतः पुमान् विष्णो पदमवाप्नोति भयशोकादिवर्जितः गीताध्ययनशीलस्य प्राणायामपरस्य च नैव सन्ति हि पापानि पूर्वजन्मकृतानि च मलनिर्मोचनं पुंसा जलस्नानं दिने दिने सकृद्गीताम्बसि स्नानं संसारमलनाशनं गीता सुगीता कर्तव्या किमन्यैः शास्त्रविस्तरैः या स्वयं पद्मनाभस्य मुखपद्माद्विनिसृता भारतामृतसर्वस्वं विष्णो वक्राद्विनिसृतं गीता गङ्गोदकं पीत्वा पुनर्जन्म न विद्यते सर्वोपनिषदो गावो दोग्धा गोपालनन्दनः पार्थो वत्सः सुधीर्भोक्ता दुग्धं गीतामृतं महत् एकं शास्त्रं देवकी पुत्र गीतम् एको देवो देवकी पुत्र एव एको मन्त्रस्तस्य नामानि यानि कर्माप्येकं तस्य देवस्य सेवा कायेन वाचा मनसेन्द्रियैर्वा बुद्ध्यात्मना वा प्रकृते स्वभावात् करोमि यद्यत् सकलं परस्मै श्रीमन्नारायणायेति समर्पयामि। हरि ओम।